It was supposed to be the beginning of forever. In August 2019, David and Marissa Collier landed in Wyoming newlyweds, bright-eyed and full of plans. They wanted to start their marriage surrounded by nature, in the quiet vastness of the Wind River Mountains. For them, it wasn't danger that called. It was beauty. For a week, they lived the dream. Mornings filled with laughter, evenings under open skies. They sent pictures home, smiling faces, mountain trails, clear rivers. To everyone who saw them, they were the image of happiness. Then, on August 14th, everything went silent. No more messages, no calls. Their rented cabin remained untouched, the stove cold, their gear still neatly folded. At first, rescuers thought it was a simple case of hikers who lost their way. But when days turned into weeks, and the search dogs followed a trail that abruptly stopped at the edge of a cliff, the story began to twist into something darker. 4 years later, a drone flying over a remote valley would capture something strange, something that would finally lead investigators back to the place where David and Marissa had vanished. And what they found was far from what anyone expected. David Collier was 29, a wildlife photographer from Portland, Oregon, whose idea of peace was chasing sunsets through mountain valleys. Marissa, 27, was a schoolteacher who found poetry in the quiet things: campfire smoke, the hum of rain on canvas, the sound of her husband's camera clicking somewhere nearby. Together, they were a portrait of gentle curiosity. Two people drawn not by thrill, but by the serenity of the wild. Their love story began in a photography class, years before the wedding. She was his first subject. He was the one who taught her to frame the world through patience and light. When they married, there was no grand celebration, just a small gathering in Oregon, close friends, and the promise of a new beginning. The honeymoon in Wyoming wasn't about luxury, it was about solitude. They wanted to disappear from the noise of the world and spend their first week of marriage where no one could find them among the peaks and shadows of Wind River. The region itself was breathtaking, yet cruel. Wind River Range stretches for nearly 100 miles, filled with glacial valleys, unpredictable weather, and steep ridgelines where storms form without warning. Rangers often warn travelers that the beauty of the range hides danger: sudden temperature drops, treacherous slopes, and areas with no cell service for miles. David and Marissa prepared carefully. They studied maps, checked weather reports, and packed light but efficiently. Dehydrated meals, a satellite beacon, notebooks, and a small drone for aerial shots. They rented a modest log cabin near Lander, just a few miles from the trail they planned to explore. Locals remembered them as polite, cheerful, and excited. They bought coffee and hiking permits, laughed about how they were unplugging for a while. Everything about their trip seemed ordinary until it wasn't. At dawn, on August 14th, the couple left their cabin while the valley was still wrapped in mist. The air was crisp, the smell of pine heavy after a night of rain. David carried his camera bag over one shoulder, while Marissa secured a folded trail map inside her jacket. They waved goodbye to a nearby camper who was boiling coffee by a fire, the last person to ever see them alive. Their plan was simple: hike the Wind River Loop, reach the western ridge by noon, rest at the overlook, and return before sunset. It was a moderate trail, though not forgiving: steep switchbacks, narrow paths along cliffs, and streams swollen from recent storms. But David had walked harsher terrain before, and Marissa trusted his quiet confidence. They had prepared carefully, and by all accounts, nothing seemed out of place. Around 10:30 a.m., David posted a short video to his camera log, later recovered from his memory card. In it, the wind howls through the pines while he pans across the valley. Marissa's voice can be heard faintly in the background, laughing as she calls him back for breakfast. The clip ends abruptly, mid-sentence, as if he'd been distracted by something off-screen. Their satellite beacon last transmitted a signal near a bend in the trail known as Raven's Pass, a point notorious for sudden fog and unstable footing. Search teams later noted that the section often becomes slippery after rainfall, with hidden gaps between rocks wide enough to swallow a person whole. By noon, the sun disappeared behind dark clouds. Temperatures dropped sharply. A ranger stationed at the base recalled seeing lightning strike high above the ridge around that time, a storm cell moving faster than predicted. If the Colliers were caught in it, they would have had little chance to find shelter. The following afternoon, when they failed to check in at their cabin, there was no immediate panic. Travelers often extended their hikes, especially couples enjoying the isolation. But when another 2 days passed and their rental car remained untouched in the lot, the first search began. Rangers followed the route marked on their map, the same one they'd studied so carefully, but the forest seemed to erase every sign of them. Near Raven's Pass, rescuers found a fallen branch caught on a jagged rock. Wrapped around it was a torn piece of fabric later confirmed to match Marissa's jacket. No blood, no footprints. Just silence and the endless wind howling down the slopes. A camera bag was later recovered near the trailhead empty, its strap frayed as if torn in a fall. The main camera itself was never found. From David's recovered equipment, the last image taken was time-stamped 11:04 a.m. It showed Marissa standing near the edge of a cliff, hair tangled by the wind, smiling faintly. Behind her, dark clouds were gathering, heavy and menacing. It was a haunting final glimpse, a moment frozen just before everything vanished. The search for David and Marissa Collier began quietly, almost routinely. On the morning of August 17th, rangers from the Wind River District hiked toward the last known coordinates transmitted from their satellite beacon. The weather had turned merciless. Heavy clouds pressed low against the ridges, and rain fell in thin, cold sheets. Each step sank into mud as they moved deeper into the range. At first, rescuers hoped it would be a quick operation, a pair of hikers delayed by weather, maybe sheltering in a cave or an old fire lookout. But by the end of the first day, optimism began to fade. The couple's planned route was empty. No footprints, no discarded gear, nothing to indicate they had ever made it past Raven's Pass. Helicopters circled the valley at sunrise the next morning, scanning the ravines for color contrast. The red of Marissa's jacket, the silver of David's camera tripod, anything unnatural against the green and gray. From above, the terrain looked endless, slopes folding into canyons, rivers twisting through forests, cliffs splitting the land like scars. On the ground, canine units were deployed. The dogs caught a faint scent near a cluster of rocks, but lost it within minutes as the wind shifted. Volunteers joined in, climbers, locals, and even hikers who had seen the couple days earlier. They combed the ridges methodically, marking each searched area with orange tape. What unsettled investigators most was the absence of struggle or chaos. Their rental car was parked neatly, doors locked, a note on the dashboard listing their intended trail and return time written in Marissa's handwriting. Inside the cabin they'd rented, 2 untouched mugs still sat on the counter. The beds were made, backpacks half unpacked, suggesting they had planned to come back. For over 2 weeks, the mountains echoed with helicopter rotors and the shouts of rescuers calling their names. Night after night, the valley grew colder, the storms stronger. Search teams lit flares to signal positions, their lights flickering like faint stars swallowed by fog. By early September, the official search had already exceeded standard protocol. Over 70 people had been involved, covering nearly 30 miles of wilderness. Still, there was no sign of the Colliers. No clothing, no electronics, no remains. It was as though they had stepped off the face of the earth. Frustration grew among the crews. One ranger described the place as a maze that rearranges itself every morning. Trails shifted after rainfall, markers vanished under rock slides, and mist rolled through like smoke, obscuring visibility to almost nothing. Even GPS signals flickered in and out, unreliable, as if the mountains themselves were rejecting interference. When the search was finally scaled back, families refused to accept closure. David's father continued sending letters to the Park Service, begging for updates, while Marissa's sister organized independent volunteers who returned every few months with drones and scanners. None of it changed anything. The valley remained eerily untouched. As the months turned into years, the story of David and Marissa Collier slowly slipped from the headlines. New disappearances took their place, and Wind River continued to live up to its grim reputation, a place of beauty that did not forgive. For the families, however, time refused to move forward. Every season brought another unanswered question, another photograph framed on a mantle that felt more like a memorial than a memory. By late 2020, official efforts had ended. The sheriff's office classified the case as unresolved with probable exposure, a sterile phrase that satisfied no one. Online forums began to fill the void, drawing in strangers fascinated by the mystery. Some believed the couple had fallen victim to a sudden rock slide, their bodies buried beneath tons of debris. Others suggested they might have been caught in a flash flood or lightning strike. But as the years passed without any physical evidence, the theories grew stranger. A handful of locals whispered that Wind River was cursed, that people sometimes stepped off the map there. Hikers spoke of hearing faint voices in the fog or seeing distant campfires vanish when approached. It was folklore, yes, but even rangers who spent decades in those mountains admitted that the Collier case unsettled them in ways they couldn't explain. Marissa's sister never stopped searching. Once a year, she returned to Wyoming with volunteers, hiking the same ridges, setting up small memorial markers that were soon swallowed by moss and time. David's father funded private aerial scans and thermal imaging surveys. Every image came back the same, nothing but rocks, trees, and emptiness. Then, in the spring of 2023, something unexpected surfaced. A pair of hikers exploring a remote valley claimed they saw a glint of metal reflecting sunlight far below a ravine. They reported it to park authorities, who dismissed it as scrap debris from an Innuation, old survey station. The incident might have been forgotten entirely if not for what happened months later. Because when a group of filmmakers sent a drone to document the area for a nature documentary, their footage captured something no one had ever seen before. Something that would reignite the Collier mystery and finally lead investigators to a place that had remained untouched for 4 long years. In early autumn of 2023, a small production crew arrived in the Wind River Range to film a documentary about the untouched wilderness of Wyoming. They weren't searching for mysteries, only beauty. The director, a young filmmaker named Ryan Keller, had flown drones across canyons and glacial valleys for weeks, capturing the jagged skyline bathed in gold light. It was during one of these flights, on the morning of September 3rd, that the lens of a camera drifted over an area few had ever entered, a deep ravine carved between 2 cliffs hidden by dense spruce. At first, it was nothing unusual: trees, rock, the shimmer of a nearby creek. But as the drone descended through the fog, something caught Ryan's eye on the monitor. A faint, unnatural shape, half buried in the undergrowth. He paused the flight, zoomed in, and froze. Among the moss and fallen branches lay a metallic gleam, the corner of an object, reflecting light, small, but distinctly manufactured. He assumed it was an old tent frame or a rusted canteen, yet the colors seemed oddly clean, untouched by years of exposure. He marked the coordinates and continued filming. That night, reviewing the footage frame by frame, the team noticed something even more unsettling. Next to the metallic object, barely visible through shadow, was the faint outline of what looked like fabric. A dark, weathered material twisted around something pale. The next day, they sent the drone back. This time, they flew lower, the camera stabilizing as it passed over the same point. When Ryan adjusted the contrast, his stomach tightened. The fabric was a backpack, faded blue, still intact, and beside it, half hidden under soil and leaves, was what appeared to be a human hand. They stopped filming. The footage was turned over to the authorities within hours. By September 6th, a recovery team from the Fremont County Sheriff's Department reached the site. It took nearly an entire day to rappel into the ravine. The slopes were slick with mud, the drop nearly 200 feet. What they found below left even veteran officers silent. Resting near a tangle of roots was a collapsed tent, partially shredded, its poles twisted like metal bones. Inside were 2 sleeping bags, zipped together, a haunting reminder of the couple's last night alive. One bag still contained a folded letter, sealed in a plastic sleeve, written in Marissa's handwriting. The words had blurred from moisture, But one line remained legible. "If anyone finds this, we stayed together." Near the entrance lay the blue backpack seen in the drone footage. Inside were personal effects, a camera battery, a broken phone, a compass, and 2 silver rings tied together with a shoelace, and a broken drone with snapped wings also found near the tent. The serial number on the camera gear matched David Collier's equipment. Investigators pieced together what they could. It appeared the couple had wandered off the main path, likely searching for a shortcut down the ridge. The ground, softened by rain, gave way beneath them. The drop wasn't immediately fatal. They had survived the fall, but were trapped with no way out. The ravine walls were too steep to climb, and without contact or food, they must have endured for days before exhaustion claimed them. The discovery made national news within hours. Headlines called it the Honeymoon Valley Mystery. For the families, it was both an ending and a wound reopened. The remains were carefully removed and identified through dental records and personal items. Yet, as investigators reviewed the drone footage once more, something else drew attention in the final seconds before the drone turned away. A second faint reflection appeared deeper in the shadows. It wasn't metal or glass, but a rectangular shape wedged between rocks. When retrieved days later, it proved to be a damaged GoPro camera, its memory card still intact. Technicians managed to extract only fragments of the last recording. The audio was distorted by wind and rain, but a few seconds were clear. Marissa's voice whispering David's name, followed by the sound of rushing water, then silence. It wasn't proof of what truly happened, but it was enough to tell the world that their final moments weren't spent in fear, only together, waiting under the endless storm. And in the end, it was a machine built to capture beauty that had found tragedy, instead uncovering the truth that 4 years of silence had tried to hide. The recovery of the GoPro camera changed everything. For years, investigators had nothing but silence. No last words, no trace of what happened after the storm rolled through Wind River. But now, for the first time, they had a witness. One that had never meant to speak. The device was severely damaged, its casing cracked and lens clouded with dirt. Technicians at the State Forensics Lab in Cheyenne spent weeks extracting fragments of video data. Much of it was corrupted static, brief flashes of movement, distorted audio drowned by wind. Yet among the noise, several minutes were intact. What they saw was haunting. The footage began with the sound of rain hitting fabric. The screen shook, blurry at first, then stabilized as if the camera had been placed on the ground. David's voice could be heard faintly, calm but strained, calling Marissa's name. He appeared briefly soaked, shivering, his jacket torn, his face pale from exhaustion. Behind him, the narrow ravine rose into darkness. Marissa's voice came next. She was alive, but weak, asking if anyone would find them. David tried to reassure her, pointing toward a small fire built from damp sticks. The flames barely survived the wind. The timestamp suggested the video was recorded 2 days after they'd fallen. Later frames showed the fire gone, replaced by darkness and the flicker of a dying flashlight. Their voices grew softer, broken by long silences. They had rationed what little food remained, melted rainwater in a tin cup, and kept waiting for rescue that never came. At one point, David lifted the camera toward the narrow slit of sky above and said, almost in disbelief, "They'll see the light, right?" Those were his final words on record. The last minute of footage was nearly unwatchable. The image showed the tent interior, lit faintly by the glow of a phone screen. Marissa's face appeared for only a few seconds, eyes open, expression distant, as she whispered something too quiet to decipher. Then the battery died. The screen went black. Investigators concluded the couple had likely succumbed to hypothermia within days. The fall had injured them badly, and without heat or shelter, their bodies simply gave out. The tent, the letter, the camera all became their final traces. When they mapped the coordinates, they realized the ravine wasn't far from the primary search zone of 2019, less than half a mile, in fact. Crews had passed directly above it multiple times, unaware that the couple lay just beneath them. Dense vegetation and the angle of the drop had concealed everything from view. The realization hit rescuers hard. 4 years of searching, and the answer had always been right below their boots. As news spread, the footage was never released publicly. Authorities deemed it too personal, too devastating. Only the families were shown the recovered clips. According to one report, David's father broke down while watching, whispering that his son had kept his promise he'd never left her side. In Wind River, the ravine was quietly named Collier Hollow, though it does not appear on official maps. Rangers placed a small plaque there. They stayed together. The following spring, the filmmakers returned to finish their documentary. Ryan Keller, who had first spotted the reflection through his drone, filmed one last shot, the valley at sunset, golden light spilling over the ridges where the couple had once walked. He said nothing. The wind carried enough. The story of David and Marissa Collier was no longer a mystery of vanishing, but of devotion, a reminder that even in the most unforgiving places, love can endure beyond fear, beyond time, and even beyond death itself. Spring returned to Wind River slowly, as if the mountains themselves were reluctant to let go of winter. Snow melted into quiet streams that wound their way through the same ravines where, for years, no one dared to look. And there, beneath the towering cliffs, 2 simple names carved into a metal plaque now marked the place where love had refused to die. When the Colliers' remains were brought home, the families chose not to hold a public funeral. Instead, they gathered by the Oregon coast, the place where David had first proposed, camera in hand, capturing Marissa's laughter against the sound of the waves. They spread their ashes together, letting the wind carry them toward the horizon. It felt fitting. The wilderness had taken them, but the open sky would keep them free. In the months that followed, the recovered footage was sealed in an archive at the sheriff's department. Only a few officers had watched it in full. One of them later described it quietly. It wasn't about fear. It was about love, holding on as long as it could. Those words became the final line of the official report. Hikers still pass through Wind River, unaware that beneath the moss and stone lies the trace of a story that nearly disappeared. Rangers say that on certain evenings, when fog settles low and the air turns still, a faint glimmer sometimes appears deep within the valley, like a reflection of light that shouldn't be there. Most dismiss it as a trick of the setting Sunday, but those who know the story believe otherwise. They say it's the echo of a promised 2 souls who refused to let the wilderness separate them. For the rest of the world, their case is closed. For those who stood among the trees and searched for them, it never truly will be. The mountains may keep their secrets, but the Colliers' final message endures not written in words, but in devotion stronger than the storm that took them. And in the end, theirs wasn't a story of disappearance. It was a story of love, found one last time by a sky that refused to forget. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Last Seen, where every week we uncover the real-life mysteries that the world tried to forget. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Subscribe, share, and stay curious.